Hello and welcome to Owning the Narrative. I am Bulow. The show will feature the top news of the week, complete with my observations, and even a little bit of sarcasm thrown in. The top news stories will be taken from my morning news briefings that I write on the Rick Bulow New Media blog every weekday morning. If you go on to like what you see, smash that thumbs up button. And now, let's go right into the news. Some mainstream media outlets claim to be fact checkers, but even their own facts first get all mixed up. This coming from my good friends over at the Daily Signal. Says bias facts first at CNN can't get his facts straight about HR1. The so-called mainstream media, including CNN, is apoplectic over former Vice President Mike Pence's recent commentary in the Daily Signal, in which he says that election integrity is a national imperative. Apparently, many media outlets disagree and don't like the fact that he points out the serious problems with H.R. 1, which just passed the House of Representatives, that would trample the First Amendment and increase opportunities for fraud. Pence is absolutely correct in that assessment. CNN published its supported refutation by claiming that he got his facts wrong about what the legislation that designated H.R. 1 does. But the CNN fact checkers are the ones who are wrong, and some of their claims border on the absurd. For example, the fact checkers assert that Pence is wrong when he said that H.R. 1 bans voter ID laws. But the bill requires states to allow individuals to vote who will sign statements in which they claim they are who they say they are. This federal requirement eviscerates state voter ID laws and, in a sense, bans them. States obviously can't force their voter ID requirements if federal law says they have to allow anyone who just signs a form to vote. CNN's characterization of the vice president's claim is not true is disingenuous and should earn them a Pinocchio award. Next, CNN claims that Pence is wrong over his concern that imposing automatic voter registration requirements on the states will lead to non-citizens, i.e. illegal aliens, although CNN followed the politically correct rule of referring to them as undocumented immigrants, being registered to vote. But there seems little doubt that will happen, and already has happened in places like California, which have implemented automatic voter registration. The complex sections of H.R. 1 on automatic voter registration require numerous state and federal agencies to send information on individuals to state election officials so they can be registered. Many state and federal agencies that don't have citizenship data on the individuals they deal with. In fact, most public secondary schools and institutions of higher learning that are included in this automatic voter registration requirement studiously avoid getting citizenship information on their students, especially illegal aliens. So it is highly likely that these schools will send information on all of the individuals they deal with, regardless of their citizenship status, to state election officials. Moreover, H.R. 1 specifically states that no alien can be prosecuted under any federal or state law or adversely affected in any civil adjudication concerning immigration status or naturalization due to being automatically registered. CNN does acknowledge that Pence is correct about felons voting. Now, while admitting that the legislation would require states to allow, with CNN's terms, formerly incarcerated persons to vote the moment they step foot out of prison, as a former vice president said, CNN fails to add that this particular provision is blatantly unconstitutional. The 14th Amendment specifically gives states the right to decide if felons lose their ability to vote and when they can get it back. You can't override a constitutional amendment with a bill passed by Congress. CNN says that the accuracy of Pence's assertion that H.R. 1 would force states to adopt universal mail-in ballots depends on how you define that term. Wrong. By forcing states to allow anyone to vote using absentee ballots without an excuse, requiring states to mail an absentee ballot request form to every registered voter, and specifying that states must create a permanent absentee ballot list for any voter that wants to be sent an absentee ballot in all elections, the legislation, in essence, creates a nearly universal mail-in voting system. CNN's fact check on redistricting is also amusing in what it reveals about the network's view of government. Pence said in his commentary that congressional districts would be withdrawn by unelected incumbent bureaucrats. CNN is forced to admit that H.R. 1 does take the power to redraw political boundaries away from state legislatures and force states to set up so-called independent redistricting commissions. But CNN claims that what constitutes an unaccountable bureaucrat is up for debate. Oh, really? State legislators who redraw political boundaries after each census are accountable to the voters who put them in office. And voters can try to vote them out of office if they don't like how those legislators conduct themselves, including the way they do something. But the members of the commission required by the legislation all would be appointed. That means that they would be unaccountable to voters who would have no recourse against commissioners whom they view as having drawn unfair, overly partisan, or inequitable political lines in the redistricting process. That sounds like unaccountable bureaucrats to me, and any member of the public with common sense. Finally, CNN admits that Pence was correct when he said that the bill requires that illegal aliens and citizens be given equal representation in Congress. But it tries to excuse that by saying this is already the case, and that President Joe Biden has ordered that the population used for reapportionment include aliens, legal and illegal. This equal representation may be true relative to apportionment, but Pence's comment had nothing to do with apportionment. What CNN fails to explain is that Pence is talking about redistricting, and it is not currently a requirement under federal law for state legislatures to draw new congressional district lines using total population data that includes aliens. Each state sets its own criteria. In fact, in the interest of fundamental fairness and equal protection principles, state legislatures should all switch to using citizen population rather than total population when drawing new congressional district lines. If H.R. 1 becomes law, they won't have that option. Contrary to CNN's biased partisan review, Pence assesses the legislation accurately and succinctly. As he said, it mandates the most questionable and abuse-prone election rules nationwide and would prevent states from implementing new needed reforms. Pence added that we should be working to restore public confidence in our elections. And you know what? He's absolutely right. If it becomes law, H.R. 1 will do the exact opposite of that. And that's so true. I mean, I looked at some measures from H.R. 1 and, you know, some of it does smell kind of fishy. You know, there's a saying, there's something rotten in the state of Switzerland or something to that extent. And that's just how, to me, H.R. 1 is. And as a matter of fact, I got this from Florence and Homer over at Hot Air. This is H.R. 1 for Dummies. In terms of casting the ballot after a voter is registered, H.R. 1 would expand procedures that make it easier to vote. It expands vote by mail, which, contrary to many partisan arguments, does not overall boost turnout of one party over another. The bill would also allow curbside voting so that older people and people with disabilities can vote from their vehicle, and prepaying the postage on mail-in ballots so a citizen doesn't miss out on casting their vote just because they cannot afford a stamp. The act also seeks to reduce wait times at the polls. Long wait times can impose undue hardships on voters, making voting physically harder on the elderly, for instance, or economically harder for hourly workers without childcare. A bipartisan commissioner recommends a 30-minute maximum wait time. But in the United States, not only do many voters wait longer than an hour and a half, lines are longer at polling places in predominantly black neighborhoods, regardless of whether that neighborhood is in a Democrat or Republican-controlled state. The For the People Act includes several provisions that would reduce wait times, including setting minimum hours and days for early voting availability, and funding states' recruitment and training of more poll workers so that they can open more polling locations. H.R. 1 also standardizes mail-by-vote procedures to reduce confusion that results in uncounted ballots. In 2020, many voters were left waiting for absentee ballots that either came too late or never arrived at all. Those who did get their ballots were often worried about their ballot arriving back at the Board of Elections in time to be counted. The Act requires states to track and confirm to the receipt of absentee ballots and make it easier for people to return ballots through secure drop boxes. Now, I'll have to look into that a little bit more, but I think that is definitely highly unlikely. But however, that is something to look into in a few. However, okay, earlier I had brought up that the media is biased. However, there are times in which some liberal reporters do shed their biases and ask very simple questions. Case in point, this article from townhall.com by Matt Respa. Liberal reporter asks a very simple question to big tech regarding COVID. It's nothing new. There are times when liberal reporters get it right. As we say often, a broken clock is right twice a day, or a blind squirrel finds a nut. In some instances, very rare instances, the few who haven't gone full communist offer more grounded commentary than any of their colleagues. Bill Maher has done excellent commentaries on political correctness, cancel culture, and radical Islamic terrorism. He did a good analysis of the Capitol Hill riot, notably avoiding comparing the people who stormed the building to the wider Trump and GOP base. Michael Tracy has been excellent at shredding woke and identity politics hysteria, along with being one of the original Nobel reporters on the left to shower tons of skepticism on the Russian collusion allegations. Glenn Greenwald is another reporter who was forced to flee the publication he founded, The Intercept, because, well, he wrote some non-nice things about Joe Biden. Greenwald, who also appeared on Fox News this weekend to offer his commentary about the state of the media, and touched on a well-known and simple question that was directed at big tech. What credentials do these people possess that allow them to be the information Stasi? In what universe can social media platforms be the information police who dictate to us, the customer, which information is acceptable and which is not? This comes as Twitter announced that any account that posts information they consider to be too kooky on COVID vaccines and the like will face a permanent ban from the platform. It's not a new question, but one that's disturbing nonetheless. Greenwald did know that Silicon Valley never wanted to be the KGB of information, regulating speech and purging conservative voices. They wanted to be a platform for people to communicate and share their opinions. He noted that they wanted to be akin to a telephone company. He also added that was even scarier than big tech taking this Politburo approach to what's on their site, is Congress leading the charge to regulate speech. Greenwald noted that these people are the targets of journalism. They cannot be allowed to turn the tables like this. From this segment with Howard Kurtz, you think that Greenwald was a dyed-in-the-wool conservative. He's not. The Intercept was founded for whistleblowers to come forward and make information without fear of retaliation. Still, I think there are also plenty of liberals who are wary of big tech's power, though for entirely different reasons. Both sides zero in on what bothers them about their companies, or these companies. They're too large, too powerful, and could chip away at Democrat norms. For conservatives, it's a censoring, purging, and regulation of speech. For liberals, more or less, it's the spending of political ads and the extraction and storage of political or personal data used for micro-targeting. Both are very powerful tools that these platforms possess. Are they private companies or public utilities? They're spinning into becoming the latter. And that's so true. And, ironically, it is the states that are taking the lead from Congress and reining in the big tech. This from Nihal Krishan from the Washington Examiner. And he says, states are taking the lead on regulating big tech platforms such as Facebook and Google, advancing rules regarding censorship, data privacy, algorithms, and advertisements. Social media censorship and content moderation has been a particularly heated area of tension between Democrats and Republicans nationwide. Members of Congress have challenged top social media executives from companies including Google, Facebook, and Twitter regarding their rules for moderating content and potential bias in their algorithms. Congress is debating multiple bills to beef up data privacy and to overhaul Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act, a provision that protects social media companies from liability for content posted by their users. As states such as Texas, Florida, Utah, and North Dakota push for laws to reduce the censorship, and states like California and Virginia implement laws to protect consumer data privacy, pressure is increasing to create national standards for both issues rather than a patchwork of state regulations. In Texas, you have Texas Governor Greg Abbott and Republican state senators who announced a bill on Friday that will help prohibit social media companies from censoring Texans based on the viewpoints they express. According to the Texas legislature, Senate Bill 12 would allow Texans to get back online if a social media platform suspends or blocks their account based on their political or religious views. Abbott said the bill would prevent social media platforms from canceling conservative speech, a complaint lodged by many conservatives after former President Donald Trump was banned from most major social media platforms for his role in the January 6th U.S. Capitol attack. Too many social media sites silence conservative speech and ideas and trample free speech. It's un-American, un-Texan, and soon to be illegal, Abbott wrote in a tweet Thursday night. In Florida, you have Florida Governor Ron DeSantis and Florida's Republican legislature in February proposing legislation billed as protecting online speech from big tech overreach. The legislation, known as the Transparency and Technology Act, includes protections from unfair changes to platform rules and terms of service, requires platforms to tell users why their accounts are being suspended or banned, and requires that algorithmic bias on behalf of a candidate be disclosed. The bill would allow users the opportunity to opt out of algorithms and enable news organizations and qualified political candidates to have equal access to users without intrusions from algorithms. If passed, the legislation would create harsh penalties and fines for tech platforms that violate the law by banning a political candidate or favoring one candidate over another. Under our proposal, if a technology company deplatforms a candidate for elected office in Florida during an election, the company will face a daily fine of $100,000 until the candidate's access to the platform is restored, stated DeSantis. Florida Republicans in February also introduced another bill that would give residents the option to opt out of the data collection by online platforms and would force big tech companies to disclose what kind of user data they collect, store, and sell. The bill would also enable Floridians to ask what platforms delete their data or fix data, the bill would enable Floridians to ask that platforms delete their data or fix data that is incorrect. This legislation is similar to a 2018 data privacy bill passed in California, which only applies to businesses with a global annual revenue of at least $25 million. In Virginia, they passed the Consumer Data Protection Act in late February, only the second comprehensive state data privacy law in the United States after California's 2018 law of the same kind, the California Consumer Privacy Act. The law would only apply to companies that control or process the data of at least 100,000 local users or process at least 25,000 Virginians' data and garner more than 50% of their gross revenue from the sale of personal data. The law will have several broad exemptions for nonprofit groups, institutes of higher education, and organizations governed by health insurance laws. The bill would also give online users the ability to choose not to have their personal data collected for targeted advertising and to require consent for their data to be collected and processed. One key difference between the bill and California's data privacy bill is that Virginia does not include a provision for a private right of action, meaning that individual consumers cannot sue big tech companies under the bill. Enforcement of the law will be mostly left up to the state attorney general. In Utah, their Republican-controlled state legislature is strikingly close to passing a bill that would force social media companies to be more transparent in how they moderate content on their platforms. Utah Republican senators say the bill will make it easier and fairer for residents to express their opinions. However, critics of the legislation say it's unconstitutional, violates the First Amendment, and could lead to a number of onerous lawsuits. The bill requires that platforms annually provide clear rules of the road regarding their content moderation practices, give notice if a resident's account access is restricted, allow users to appeal a decision to have content removed, and have an independent review to look over content moderation practices. The bill outlines that the Utah Attorney General would review social media complaints filed with the Utah Division of Consumer Protection, and the Attorney General would then have the option to take action against a social media company based on the terms of the law's language. The bill has passed the Utah State House and Senate and now heads to the governor for final approval. In North Dakota, their state Republican lawmakers in January introduced legislation that would hold big tech companies such as Facebook and Twitter liable if they censor people on their platforms. The bill, called an act to permit civil actions against social media sites for censoring speech, is the state's attempt to circumvent Section 230. The bill will only apply to social media platforms with more than 20 million active users that have been in existence for at least 1 year. The platforms would be liable in a civil action for damages to the person whose speech is restricted, censored, or suppressed, and to any person who reasonably otherwise would have received the writing, speech, or publication. The punishment for censoring users would include restoring the blocked content and statutory damages of up to $50,000. The North Dakota's bill lead sponsor is Republican Representative Tom Kading, who introduced the bill after a number of major social media platforms banned Trump in January. And that's good. I mean, you know, we definitely need to rein social media in, or at least the big tech companies in, and yeah, so that is something that I'm definitely going to look more into. Leave a comment below what you think about those bills. Also leave a comment what you think about HR 1. And I'll see you in the next video. It looks like big technology critics are being part of Biden's administration. Might be a good thing, might be a bad thing. We will know in the future, though. This coming from CNBC. Biden is loading up his administration with big tech's most prominent critics. Nearly 2 months into his presidency, it's finally becoming clear how Joe Biden plans to approach the tech sector, and it's looking very different from the approach under the Obama administration. The selection of 2 major critics of the big tech companies, Lina Khan and Tim Wu, for key roles in the administration seems to signal that Biden is serious about taking a tough look at giants like Amazon, Apple, Facebook, and Google. The latter 2 of those companies are already facing federal antitrust lawsuits filed under the previous administration. Biden's reported selection of Khan as nominee to the Federal Trade Commission leaves little room for doubt that the administration hopes to see robust enforcement of the antitrust laws and other regulations in the tech space. Politico reported Tuesday that the administration this week was in the late stages of vetting the nominee, citing sources. A White House spokesperson did not immediately respond to CNBC's request for comment on the report. Before taking her current role teaching law students at Columbia University, Khan worked for the House Judiciary Subcommittee on Antitrust, helping to compile a nearly 450-page report accusing the 4 tech giants of maintaining monopoly power and suggesting a major overhaul of the antitrust laws and their enforcement. Khan, 32 years old, rose to prominence in antitrust scholarship after writing Amazon's Antitrust Paradox as a law student at Yale University in 2017 in which she argued for more expansive understanding of how U.S. antitrust laws can be applied to a company like Amazon. While courts have for years often relied on the much debated consumer welfare standard to evaluate whether an antitrust violation has taken place, often pegged to the price of goods and services to consumers, Khan argued the standard is ill-equipped to evaluate potential harm by online platforms. Khan wrote that predatory pricing could be uniquely in the interests of platforms because they are often rewarded for pursuing growth instead of profits. Now, from the outside, this could appear to benefit consumers by lowering prices, though it would undercut legitimate competitors who could be cut out of the market. She also argued that platforms can control essential infrastructure competitors or essentially in the infrastructure that competitors come to depend upon, which enables the platforms to exploit information against rivals. In addition to the expected nomination of Khan, the administration last week announced that Columbia University law professor Tim Wu would join the National Economic Council to work on technology and competition policy. Wu helped popularize the idea that major tech firms may need to be broken up to reinvigorate competition through his 2018 book, The Curse of Bigness, Antitrust in the New Gilded Age. He also coined the term net neutrality, which ultimately ignited a major debate about whether internet service providers should have the ability to slow or speed up internet services. Prior to the revelation of these two picks, tech critics had remained wary of how Biden would ultimately select his top tech enforcers. Progressive groups warned the administration not to select staffers or nominees with big tech ties, including former Google CEO Eric Schmidt, who is rumored to be discussed for an administration role. The fear also came from the Obama administration's reputation as a tech-friendly White House that also failed to bring major enforcement actions against the tech giants. Even so, many expected Biden's approach would likely differ, if only because public sentiment toward the tech sector had swung drastically since 2016. Now, to be sure, Biden must still fill the top antitrust role at the Department of Justice and the fifth empty seat on the FTC, assuming his nominee for the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, who is a current FTC commissioner, is confirmed. But the selection of Khan and Wu for key roles seems to send a strong signal to both progressives and the big tech companies that the administration will not back down from strong enforcement. Now, that's interesting, especially considering how, it is big tech that is silencing and stifling free speech, especially that among conservatives. And that leads us into this article from my good friends over at the Daily Signal, why technology is both a gift and a challenge to think tanks. Jim McGann, director of the Think Tanks and Civil Societies program at the University of Pennsylvania, once thought technology would lead to the downfall of many think tanks. Now, he says, it's apparent that technology is one of the most powerful tools available to research institutions. I thought technology would be what would make many think tanks become extinct, McGann said during an online launch event on February 25th for his new book, The Future of Think Tanks and Policy Advice in the United States. The coronavirus pandemic forced many think tanks to accelerate their use of various technologies, such as YouTube, Instagram, and virtual meeting platforms, allowing the institutions to weather the storm and, in many cases, increase their influence, McGann said. His book features a collection of essays from 21 American think tank presidents, including Casey James of the Heritage Foundation, Kenneth R. Weinstein of the Hudson Institute, and John Allen of the Brookings Institution. It also features insights from 3 former think tank presidents who were influential in the development of such research institutions, including Edwin J. Fuellner, former longtime president of the Heritage Foundation. Intended as a resource tool for organizations and individuals across America to understand how to advance sound research, McGann's book examines the ways in which experts, evidence, think tanks, and policy advice have been challenged significantly in the past 4 to 6 years and what can be done about it. McGann McGann says his book is intended to answer 6 specific questions through the essays written by the 21 presidents of think tanks. Number 1, what are the greatest challenges facing think tanks? Number 2, what is the value added by think tanks and how effective have they been? 3, how should think tanks position themselves for the future? 4, how have recent innovations affected think tanks? 5, how have new competitors transformed the marketplace of ideas? And 6, what has been the impact of COVID-19 on think tanks? The challenge many think tanks now face is balancing innovation and progress with preserving a commitment to excellent research centers, McGann said. As president of the Heritage Foundation, named the think tank with the best use of the internet 3 years in a row by McGann's Global Go-To Think Tank Index report, James wrote in her essay that think tanks must remain committed to both preservation and progress. Technology offers think tanks the ability to share data and research with new and broader audiences while maintaining standards of excellence, James adds. Technology also helps us deliver our messages in more compelling and persuasive ways. No longer is a white paper sufficient for reaching a mass audience. Videos, graphics, and emotive stories combined with policy research and disseminated through traditional media, social media, and the internet are more effective ways to reach audiences. Due to these rapid changes in the technology space, it's no longer sufficient for think tanks only to hire researchers. There is also a need for communications and digital experts, Frederick Kemp, CEO of the Atlantic Council, said during the book launch. Although technology does serve as a powerful tool for sharing information, Brian Finley of the Stimson Center, president of the Stimson Center, said technology also has created significant challenges for think tanks. Technology has grown the how about that? Technology has grown the level of competition, Finley added, or said, adding that the sheer volume of policy advice that is being directed at policymakers is clearly having an impact on increasingly crowding out the voices of think tanks. But in spite of the challenges, he said, technology is ultimately one of the most powerful tools available for think tanks to navigate current communications challenges and promote well-researched information to the broader public. Technology is really an opportunity and a lifeline for us to, if we can employ that technology appropriately, leverage our work and remain relevant in the policy space, Finley said. Now, interestingly enough, along those lines, that even includes big technology such as the aforementioned social media giants, Facebook, Twitter, and Google. So things are looking up, and technology, big and small, can be a boom and a bust for many. And as a matter of fact, going back to the White House for just a minute, Biden is nominating an anti-monopoly activist to the FTC, signaling a big tech crackdown. This from the Washington Examiner. President Biden reportedly will nominate Lina Khan, a well-known anti-monopolist and a vocal critic of big tech's powers, to the Federal Trade Commission. The move signals the administration's intent to pursue an aggressive tech regulatory agenda to rein in companies such as Facebook, Google, and Amazon. Khan is going through the final parts of her background check before the Biden administration announces her nomination, Politico reported. She would then have to be confirmed by the Senate before taking up the role. Khan's nomination follows the announcement earlier this month that Biden has tapped another prominent big tech critic, Timothy Wu, to join the White House as a special assistant on technology and competition policy. Khan is an antitrust professor at Columbia Law School whose research has focused on technology markets, She previously worked as an aide to Democrat FTC Commissioner Rohit Chopra and served as a top advisor on the House Judiciary Committee's antitrust panel, which conducted a major investigation into abuse by big tech platforms. The antitrust panel investigation, which she helped guide, concluded that expansive antitrust reforms are needed for large tech platforms, including banning big tech firms from competing with smaller companies that are dependent on it in certain markets. This could mean, for example, that Amazon could not sell the similar products that smaller firms first invented and sold on the Amazon platform. The committee also suggested making it more difficult for dominant companies to acquire smaller ones. Utah Senator Mike Lee, the top Republican on the Senate Antitrust Committee, outlined opposition to Khan Tuesday morning. Lee said that she lacks the experience necessary for such an important role, and that her views on antitrust enforcement are also wildly out of step with a prudent approach to the law. Khan is perhaps well known for publishing a groundbreaking paper as a law student at Yale on Amazon's antitrust paradox, which concluded that many of the retail giant's actions, particularly how it sets its prices, could break antitrust law. Antitrust laws are meant to protect consumers from anti-competitive mergers and business practices. The Trade Commission and the Justice Department are responsible for antitrust enforcement primarily through investigations, lawsuits, penalties, and fines. If confirmed by the Senate, Khan would join the 5-member Trade Commission at a time when it is expected to feature more aggressive antitrust enforcement, especially with regard to big tech, now that it is set to receive bipartisan support for funding and resources. Now, this is at least in my mind, feel free to comment below if I'm in error on this, but okay. I'm thinking back to AT&T, or who had a monopoly on long distance. I believe it was back in the 80s, and AT&T was broken up, and you had many other and smaller companies like MCI and others joining in the long distance fight. So, but I think that's it. Correct me if I'm wrong in the comment section below. And in other news, we do have Rush Limbaugh's death still up there. It has left a void in the talk radio industry, and Jennifer Graham over at Deseret News has a question: who could fill it? The seismic loss poses challenges for talk radio and AM stations in a changing media landscape. Editors note the death of Rush Limbaugh, the growth of Newsmax, and changes of censorship by Amazon and other booksellers are among the forces shaking up conservative media companies. In this 3-part series, the Deseret News examines the challenges facing radio, television, and book publishing, and how those challenges might affect the companies and you, the reader, listener, and viewer. Now, I'm looking at this. I might just take a look at this in future videos, mayhap. But the article says 3 weeks after his death, Rush Limbaugh still rules the most valuable real estate in radio. His talk radio show is still on the air as millions of fans and would-be replacements wonder who will become the next Rush. It's a question that it wrecks the industry long before the king of talk radio died of lung cancer February 17, without an obvious successor in place. Although Limbaugh's success gave rise to hundreds of other conservative talk show hosts across the nation, and elevated voices like Sean Hannity, Glenn Beck, and Mike Levin, analysts say there is no Prince Charles of talk radio poised to settle into Limbaugh's throne with the same influence and audience size that Limbaugh had. And whoever eventually takes over Limbaugh's time slot will have to contend with tumultuous changes taking place in the industry, such as an aging audience and competition from podcasts and on-demand music on smartphones, as well as the inevitable comparisons to the man described on his death certificate as the greatest radio host of all time. Limbaugh was a unique talent who defined talk radio for more than 3 decades, and it's likely that no one can duplicate his success, said Donna Halper, a media historian who teaches communication and media studies at Lesley University in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Rush Limbaugh was on the air in a certain time in a certain space, when radio was still the dominant media and there was no one else doing what he was doing. Now every city has someone doing what he's doing, Halper said. But that doesn't mean that people aren't salivating over the job opening. As when the legendary disc jockey Scott Muni died in 2004, every talk show host from here to Alaska is sending their materials to the appropriate authorities in hopes of getting an interview, Halper said. Premier Networks, the company that syndicates the Rush Limbaugh show, could pluck someone from relative obscurity in a small market, or it could play chess with its lineup, moving other conservative superstars into new time slots. Some people even hope that Premier could convince a former president to take over the slot. Industry analysts say that Donald Trump could bring instant ratings, but that it's unlikely he would want the job. And a better choice might be to bring in a host who might appeal to a different type of audience, such as young Republicans or conservative women. Here's a look at options that Premier and its parent company iHeartMedia may be considering, and why Limbaugh's passing might signal trouble for AM radio, but not for the conservatism that the self-described America's anchorman embraced. The obvious solution? Love him or loathe him, Limbaugh was a ratings tentpole, a term used in broadcasting to describe a person whose success trickled down to others, said Brian Rosenwald, scholar in residence of the University of Pennsylvania and the author of Talk Radio's America. As such, he describes Limbaugh's passing as a seismic loss. He catalyzed other shows with ratings. People would tune in before his show or when they left the radio on after his show was over, so the show after him got ratings. He was an anchor, and people don't talk about this enough, but 12 to 3 is not really a big day part in radio. He was offering this huge benefit to stations in a window that is not the easiest in which to get a big audience, or be really successful because a lot of people are at work, Rosenwald said. Fred Jacobs, a longtime radio consultant and president of Jacobs Media, likened the search for the next Rush to the search for a replacement for Howard Stern, who left CBS for SiriusXM in 2006. There was no next Stern to be discovered, Jacobs said. Even though Premier does have a whole gaggle of these guys and women out of the Rush School of Radio Broadcasting, there is no replacing him. There would be wise proportion from that standpoint. We've only been looking for the next Beatles for the past 50 years, and it hasn't happened. Rush was a once-in-a-generation talent, Jacobs said. Limbaugh, who started working as a disc jockey at age 16, began broadcasting nationally in 1998, a year after the Federal Communications Commission ended its policy requiring the radio and TV stations give equal time to opposing viewpoints. The elimination of the fairness doctrine is widely believed to have enabled Limbaugh's success, as stations could air 3 hours of Limbaugh espousing conservative principles and skewering his ideological opponents without pressure to give equivalent time to Democrats. Limbaugh's political detractors tried to find someone who could match Limbaugh in stature. A progressive network called Air America lasted 6 years and gave MSNBC's Rachel Maddow her first national exposure. But Limbaugh soon garnered a formidable audience and gave rise to an industry that was dominated by conservative voices. About 95% of talk radio hosts are conservative or libertarian in bent, according to Halper, who formerly worked as a radio consultant, training talk show hosts. Halper didn't agree with Limbaugh's ideology, but considered him a very talented broadcaster who was enormously entertaining in his early years. He was a salvation of AM radio, absolutely. He was someone who made a huge difference for talk show hosts nationwide. He showed that radio is still powerful and can make a difference, Halper said. Limbaugh used the medium to create a club for many conservatives, an on-air water cooler where people could gather in the middle of the workday to hear jokes, ridicule opponents, and learn new, interesting things. In fact, the talk shows in general serve that purpose, Rosenwald of the University of Pennsylvania said. The first 2 stations expanded as all conservative talk stations were in San Francisco and Seattle. That usually stuns people because they're such liberal places, Rosenwald said. But you only need 3 to 5% of America to have a really great station. And in San Francisco and Seattle, the one thing you couldn't openly be was a conservative. So it was kind of a clubhouse for people who couldn't say what they thought, who felt they couldn't be open in their beliefs. They had this refuge in talk radio. But Limbaugh just didn't hold forth at the water cooler. He expanded into books, speaking tours, and for a while television. In the early 90s, some restaurants established rush rooms where diners could listen to the show while they ate. And seeing his success, talk radio stations across the country hired people they hoped would be the next Rush, putting local conservative talkers on the air in the morning and afternoon slots. Limbaugh joked that he would not stop talking until everyone agreed with him, and while he didn't achieve that, his own reach and that of his imitators was enormous. His show was on more than 600 stations, and estimates of leadership ranged from 15 million to 27 million each week. Talkers magazine, which covers the industry, estimated the combined reach of the top 15 radio hosts in December 2020 at nearly 150 million. The number of listeners, combined with the hours of content that are available, have turned millions of Americans toward conservatism. Paul Matsko, author of The Radio Right, wrote for the New York Times. The typical major talk radio show is produced every weekday and runs 3 hours, so just the top 15 shows are putting out around 45 hours of content every day. Even setting aside hundreds of additional talk shows, the dedicated fan can listen to nothing but conservative talk radio all day, every day of the week, and never catch up, wrote Matsko, who believes that talk radio has steered many Americans toward the policies of former President Trump. Rosenwald, the author of Talk Radio's America, also has drawn a direct line from Limbaugh's success to the election of Trump, saying, his election is the purest product of the revolution Limbaugh began. But Rosenwald also sees a radio talent in Trump, who he has described as less than a president from his central casting than a radio host. But Trump fans shouldn't get too excited about that prospect, he said. If Donald Trump wanted to do it, he's the obvious solution. The problem is, and the thing that people outside radio don't always understand, is that it's a lot of work to do a 3-hour daily show, Rosenwald said. I saw no indication, even when he was president, that Donald Trump wants to do that kind of work. Other conservative stars with large followings, such as Hannity and Tucker Carlson of Fox News, already have generous salaries and long work days, and are unlikely to want to take on more work, the analyst said. So who would? Podcaster Ben Shapiro, who became the youngest syndicated columnist in the U.S. at age 17, is a possibility, Halper said. Rosenwald said to keep an eye on Brian Winterble, who has the 3 to 6 show at WBT in Charlotte, North Carolina, and once worked for Limbaugh. But it's ironic that there are few, if any, obvious successors after Limbaugh launched scores of talk radio careers. That's partly because of his exceptional talent, but also because he died at a time the industry is changing. And in recent years, stations have relied on syndicated programming instead of investing money in new talent, Rosenwald said. The graying of talk radio. Although Limbaugh is credited with revitalizing AM radio, the number of AM stations is slowly declining. AM stations peaked at about 5,000 in the 90s, coinciding with the proliferation of rush rooms. In December 2000, there were 4,685 AM stations on the air. In December of 2020, there were 4,551, according to Paul McLean, editor of the trade publication Radio World. The physical number of stations on the AM band has not changed all that much, not dramatically, but the general perception about the AM band is that's not where the action is, McLean said. Also, the largest group of talk radio listeners is 65 or older, and not considered a desirable demographic for advertisers. The kind of talk radio that Limbaugh did attracts an older, brighter audience, Halper said, adding that for someone to be successful in that slot now, he or she would have to find a way to bring in younger people, and younger people are not listening to AM radio, she said. They're listening to podcasts, which is one reason that Fox News now has an audio division, and it recently announced 5 new podcasts, including one with former Utah GOP Congressman Jason Chaffetz. The parent company of Premier Networks, iHeartMedia, owns more than 850 radio stations in the U.S., but is also aggressively marketing podcasts and recently made headlines with its transition of Triton Digital. At the start of this year, there were 1.7 million podcasts available in the US, according to Nielsen Global Media. While listeners of AM radio were older and white, podcasters draw a more diverse audience. According to Nielsen, 41% of podcast listeners are not white, which makes the podcast audience more diverse than the nation's total population. Podcast listeners are also younger and more educated than the general population. The AM radio listener gets about 38 minutes of the talk show host and 22 minutes of news and commercials, compared to a podcast where a 1-minute commercial might play every half hour, Rosenwald said. Most people in the business say Rush Limbaugh saved AM radio, and that's a reasonable claim. But he may have only saved it for a generation, he said, adding that Limbaugh's death impales AM radio, but not the type of entertainment and information that Limbaugh delivered. AM radio has a real problem, but conservative content and conservative media is going to continue to thrive, he said. The content is not going anywhere. I could think of probably 3 or 4 good radio show, talk radio hosts that could replace Rush, even though there is no one that could replace Rush Limbaugh. You know, I'm thinking, and this is just my list, and I had listened to them on the radio and thought that they were good. There's Tony Katz, who's out of Indiana now, I think WIBC. There's Dana Lash, and oh, by the way, with Tony Katz, I had listened to him when he had his own 1-hour internet show, I guess you would call it. But yeah, so there's Tony Katz, there's Dana Lash, who was out of St. Louis, and I believe she is now in Dallas. I'll have to look at that. There's Larry O'Connor, who had a late night show called Stage Right on the internet. And I think last I heard he was on a station out of Washington, D.C., probably moved, but that's what I had recalled. Those are the top 3, just off the top of my head, that I know, you know, as well as a few others. You know, one person that I'm even thinking about is, and keep an eye on this guy, because he used to work for Sean Hannity over at Fox News. He was also editor at Independent Journal Review, BizPac Review, and a few other places. His name is Kyle Becker. Becker, you can follow him at beckernews.com. So leave a comment below what you or who you think could replace Rush Limbaugh. Also leave a comment as to your take on Joe Biden's big technology critics hiring, and I'll see you in the next video. HR 1 is still in the news, and right now the Democrats are rethinking the whole U.S. voting system. Got this from NBCnews.com. And it's Democrats rethink the U.S. voting system. What's in the massive HR 1? House Democrats' top legislative priority, the HR 1 for the People Act of 2021, is 791 pages of big election changes. The legislation, a wish list of policies voting rights advocates have urged lawmakers to adopt for years, rethinks the whole voting process, how people register to vote, how ballots are cast, and how states conduct elections. The goal is to improve access, particularly for voters of color. The bill would also create public financing systems for campaigns and ethics rules for candidates. This is the next great civil rights bill, says Elizabeth Hira, an attorney at the Brennan Center for Justice at the New York University School of Law, which helped craft the bill in her previous job at the House of Representatives. Voting rights advocates say the legislation could help prevent gerrymandering and restrictive voting laws. Wendy Weiser, vice president of the Democracy Program at the Brennan Center, said H.R. 1 would thwart nearly all of the more than 200 restrictive voting proposals the group has identified in 43 states. The bill stands little chance in the Senate under its current rules. Even though Democrats have a slim majority, at least 10 Republican votes would be needed to pass it. Republicans argue that legislation would federalize election administration, and they have worked to mobilize supporters against it. Here's what the bill would do. Make it easier to register and stay on the rolls. The bill sets out to make it easier to get on and stay on voter registration rolls. H.R. 1 would require states to offer online voter registration systems, which 40 states and Washington, D.C. already allow, and same-day voter registration during federal elections. It would also require local officials to automatically register eligible voters. 18 states have already have some type of automatic registration, and national implementation could register 50 million more new voters, according to the Brennan Center. The bill would also limit how states can purge voter rolls and require the U.S. Postal Service to facilitate voter registration updates when people fill out change of address forms. The bill would require states to allow 16 and 17-year-olds to pre-register when they get their driver's licenses, so they would be able to vote when they turn 18. That really matters because Generation Z and Generation Y collectively are the largest voting bloc. They just surpassed the boomers in the power of their vote, Hira said. Make it easier to vote. Several of the bill's measures aim to make voting easier and quicker. The bill would require states excuse me, to allow all voters the option of voting by mail, and it would mandate 15 consecutive days of in-person early voting for at least 10 hours a day. The bill would stop state lawmakers who were already trying to place more, if not fewer, restrictions on mail voting. States would be required to notify voters 7 days before election if their polling places have changed. The bill also seeks to force states to address long wait times on election day, requiring the allocation of enough resources to ensure that voters don't wait longer than 30 minutes. Enfranchise millions of former felons. The bill would restore voting rights for felons who have completed their prison sentences. Some states bar citizens with felony convictions from voting for some period of time, such as during probation. The provision could restore voting rights for millions. The Sentencing Project, a group advocating for criminal justice reforms, estimated in 2020 that 5.2 million Americans are disenfranchised by felony convictions. At least 2.2 million of them have completed their sentences in full and would be disenfranchised, as well as those completing sentences outside of prison, like probation. It's estimated that 900,000 of those disenfranchised former felons are in Florida, the group notes. The single greatest impact is in Florida, where voters overwhelmingly voted for a similar policy that got thwarted by legislation, Weiser said, pointing to a ballot measure that passed in 2018, only to be effectively nullified by state legislators. And gerrymandering. The bill would ban district maps that unduly favor one party or another as measured by scientifically accepted measures of partisan fairness. The bill doesn't finger a specific formula. Several have been used in the past. Both states gerrymandered, but in 2010, Republicans controlled more state governments and more redistricting processes. Technological advances in the last 2 decades have made gerrymandering, the practice of drawing district lines that benefit one party over another, incredibly effective. Critics say it makes it too easy for politicians to pick their voters when it should be the other way around. It could be transformative, said redistricting expert Michael Lee, senior counsel at the Brennan Center. Otherwise, you're going to see maps rigged in such a way that the result is predetermined. A number of states have embraced independent redistricting commissions on their own, but the majority of states still let their legislatures draw the map. Because of the 2020 census, all states are due to redraw their maps in the next year. Republicans control the process in more states, and Democrats see changing the rules as a way to more evenly distribute control of the process. Beef up election cybersecurity. The bill would establish a number of parameters to improve election security. standards for election vendors, rules for communicating potential cyber attacks to federal authorities, and requirements for states to protect voter registration databases from cyber attacks. The bill would also create a security bounty system, which would allow security analysts to be paid for finding security flaws in the election system. Create public financing to cut out big donors. The bill would create a system of public financing for congressional candidates that would match donations under $200 with 6 times the funding the candidates agreed to. Rules that would include not accepting donations over $1,000. Under the proposed system, $100 donations would get candidates an additional $600 in public funds for a total of $700,000 or $700. Sorry about that. Candidates would be required to disclose all contributions and return unspent public funds over $100,000. The bill also seeks to revamp the public financing system for presidential races, which most major party candidates used until 2008, when Barack Obama opted out of the system. The bill would up the public match for small donations, bar candidates from accepting donations larger than $1,000, and update the system's rules and restrictions. The bill would also test out a voucher system in 3 states that would let voters allocate $25 to the candidate of their choice. The system is based on a similar program in Seattle. Now that's all well and good, but I mean, you know, it's just Congress getting in and creating big government. And of course they have their allies in the media distorting debate and the details as well. This coming from my good friends over at the Daily Signal. How the media distorts debate and details of H.R. 1. A piece of legislation working its way through Congress would append further the way Americans conduct elections. But the way many media outlets are covering it, one would think the bill, which Democrats designed as H.R. 1 bill or the so-called For the People Act, is just a simple, uncontroversial reform that most Americans agree with. But it's far from that. Beyond the name of the legislation, which declares itself as For the People, much of the media coverage has been deceptive and clearly intended to present the bill in the best, most innocuous light possible. For instance, media outlets frequently portray H.R. 1 as a voter rights bill. Outlet after outlet describes the legislation this way, despite vagueness about exactly what voting rights are being threatened. Vox calls it a voting rights bill, as does the Washington Post. A New York Times headline calls H.R. 1 a voting rights expansion. Make no mistake, the Democrats' bill really is sweeping in what it aims to do. It's hard even to summarize H.R. 1 because of the scope of the changes that were made if signed into law by President Joe Biden. The editors at National Review made a solid attempt to do so. It would override hundreds of state laws governing the orderly conduct of elections, federalize control of voting and elections to a degree without precedent in American history, and 2 centuries of state power to draw congressional districts, turn the Federal Elections Commission into a partisan weapon, and massively burden political speech against the government while offering government handouts to congressional candidates or congressional campaigns and campus activists, merely to describe the bill is to damn it, and describing it as a Herculean task in itself. Does this sound like a bill that just protects voters' rights? As I wrote about H.R. 1 when Democrats first floated the legislation in 2019, it's really a massive grab bag of progressive priorities that run the gamut from bad policy to outright unconstitutional. H.R. 1 would fundamentally change the way in which our federal constitutional republic functions. That progressive activists desire this is one thing. It's not like they ever have been entirely enamored of our constitutional system. The bigger problem is that media outlets distorting that kind of, or what kind of changes are really on the table and how all-encompassing they would be. Are Americans really uniformly in favor of effectively nullifying state voter ID laws or handing over all power for overseeing elections to an increasingly partisan federal agency? As studies have shown, voter ID laws don't appear to affect minority voter turnout at all. So why is that election integrity measure considered voter suppression? It looks like H.R. 1 has nothing to do with protecting voter rights and everything to do with manipulating and nationalizing how we conduct elections. When former Vice President Mike Pence laid out his objections to the legislation in a commentary for the Daily Signal, critics attacked him in a deluge of media stories. One particularly egregious fact check from CNN distorted Pence's position while misrepresenting what H.R. 1 really would do if enacted into law. Hans von Spakovsky, a senior legal fellow and election law expert at the Heritage Foundation, did an excellent job of refuting CNN's fact check. His piece is well worth reading, and I think I had mentioned that a few days ago in another video. I'll add that the left and its media allies are peddling a curious line of argument. They insist that any questions about the conduct of the 2020 election or electoral integrity in general are promoting the big lie, as CNN fact-check claims. They also argue that our voting system is hopelessly broken and requires massive sweeping changes or democracy will end. They want to have it both ways. They treat one side as inherently illegitimate, the other as beyond even questioning. The bottom line is that H.R. 1 would change drastically the way our elections work. Progressive activists are downright giddy about what the effects will be after it's passed. We should expect that supposedly nonpartisan media outlets, such as the Associated Press, would attempt to create balanced portrayals of what H.R. 1 is. Instead, we get skewed reporting such as this. It's worth noting here that HR stands for House of Representatives, not House of Resolution. So the Associated Press couldn't even get that right. Again, the AP portrays Democratic intentions as good, Republican intentions as bad. All of this is just the latest in a long list of examples of why Americans have lost faith in big, powerful media institutions that used to act as though they were objective and unbiased. The problem is getting worse. Instead of reforming how they do business to regain the confidence of Americans, powerful media outlets go further down the road of partisanship and ideological purity, and some even look to outright silence dissenting voices. Guardians of the free press indeed. Now that right there is so definitely true. I mean, you have a lot of voter rights being trampled with H.R. 1 and also election integrity. As a matter of fact, there's a piece at the American Thinker by Vince Coiner entitled Why Election Integrity Matters. If you've ever read Lord of the Flies, The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich, or in 1984, you understand the threat to life and limb from unrestrained power. Lord Acton distilled the danger down to a simple phrase: absolute power corrupts absolutely. Our founding fathers knew that, which is why they crafted for us the Constitution, the greatest document ever written by men. With H.R. 1, the Democrats will destroy our rights with that document, or under that document. The founders built into the Constitution a variety of checks and balances on government as a whole and its branch of government to ensure that they never accumulated too much power. They gave us the Connecticut Compromise, which balanced representation between large and small states, with 2 senators elected from each state and congressmen being elected based on population. The legislature, which passes laws, and the executive, which implements them, and the hugely significant Massachusetts Compromise, which created the ultimate check on government power, the Bill of Rights, which explicitly articulated individual rights upon which the government could not infringe. Finally, in what it was likely the most groundbreaking element of any constitution ever written, the Founding Fathers explicitly limited the government's powers with the 9th and 10th Amendments. The former stated that the Constitution's enumeration of certain rights did not preclude the existence of others not addressed, while the latter stated that the federal government had only those powers given, and not any given to it, and any not given to it were reserved for states or the people. Extraordinary students of history and men, Madison, Adams, Franklin et al., understood man's nature and built a constitution specifically crafted to counter that nature. It wasn't a perfect document and had a tool for addressing imperfections built into it, but it largely worked well for 233 years and allowed the United States to develop into the strongest and most powerful nation in the history of mankind. Specifically, the Founders' Constitution worked because, by design, it was insulated from men's passions. The Senate's staggered 6-year terms balanced the House's biennial elections, and originally the states appointed senators while people elected congressmen. Presidents were elected every 4 years, and justices were appointed for life. For each office, the Constitution explicitly limited their powers. Incredibly, while the founders knew nothing about cars, televisions, mobile phones, or the internet, the mechanisms they put in place largely survived time's march. But for all of their familiarity with the dark sides of man's nature, even the founding fathers, possibly the greatest assembly of men to ever come together in history, could not foresee the darkness that lay ahead with the Democrat Party of the 21st century. Today, America sits and watches as Democrats essentially send the Constitution through the shredder. Emboldened by a pusillanimous Supreme Court, Democrats with H.R. 1 seek to undermine the Constitution's very foundation, voting integrity by the governed. They seek to codify arrangements that, by their very nature, are intended to eviscerate the notion of voter integrity. Voter ID eliminated, mail-in voting mandated, elimination of accurate voter rolls outlawed, same-day registration required, ballot harvesting allowed. These anti-integrity initiatives and many more will be codified under H.R. 1, with the goal of giving Democrats end-to-end control over voting in the United States. Once they achieve this, they will control every branch and every element of the federal government in perpetuity. And given that they back a regulatory state that never met a freedom it didn't want to regulate, they will control every aspect of the lives of formerly free Americans. And that will be the end of America as we know it. Entrepreneurial innovation, gone unless the mission furthers the green or justice themes of Democrats. Educational freedom, access to and success within will be predicated on a willingness to muzzle any thoughts or words that fall outside of whatever is currently deemed acceptable. Virtually everything from sports to medicine to science to literature to the media to the internet to your very job will become nothing more than a vehicle for establishing people's acquiescence to the left's diktats, whether the Democrats regulate them directly or they come indirectly through their fellow travelers embedded in academia, the media, and increasingly big business. For more than 2 centuries, Americans suffered through periods of government overreach, incompetence, malice, and outright failure because they understood that the American people had the ultimate hand in dictating how the government is run, and the voting booth would give them the opportunity to make a change for the better. Voting in the elections were chaotic, exasperating, and sometimes frustrating, but we largely accepted them because they were seen as a legitimate reflection of the public's voice. With H.R. 1, the Democrats are disemboweling election integrity, sullying the sanctity of the voting booth, and most importantly, undermining Americans' confidence that they control their own government and, by extension, their own destinies. The Constitution works only because people have confidence in its workings and their role in it. It's that confidence that has bound Americans as one people and fostered an extraordinary nation for 2 centuries. It would be tragic, albeit predictable, if Democrat schemes pretending to strengthen election integrity resulted in just the opposite, and in doing so undermine the very ties that bind the nation together in the first place. Now, that is a rather interesting and telling statement in and of itself there. You know, so what's the solution, you may be thinking and asking yourselves? Well, you know, with all this chaos, it would need a constitutional amendment to fix it. And there's an article in the Epoch Times, or there's a column and commentary in the Epoch Times by Robert G. Nadelson that has just the idea. H.R. 1 would create such chaos, we would need a constitutional amendment to fix it. H.R. 1, the bill for federal takeover of elections that just passed the House of Representatives, is a constitutional nightmare. If the Senate approves it, we almost certainly will need a constitutional amendment to clean up the mess. This has happened before. In 1970, we had to enact the 26th Amendment to cure congressionally cause voting chaos. This time, though, the situation would be even worse. H.R. 1 is one of those massive bills, in this case 791 pages, that no one reads in their entirety until people try to apply them. Then everyone throws up their hands aghast, shouting, "What were they thinking when they passed this thing?" The answer, of course, is that those who passed it, weren't thinking about much of anything, at least not about anything defensible. This essay will allow just a few of the constitutional problems in H.R. 1. You can bet there are more where they come from. H.R. 1 purports to change many, many aspects of federal elections. Others have those aspects in detail, among them requiring states to set up independent redistricting commissions that draw congressional districts. Note the question marks, independent commissions don't, note the quotation marks. Independent commissions don't stop politics. They just hide politics from public view. Institutionalizing permanently the mail-in ballot irregularities we just went through in the 2020 presidential election. Imposing restrictions on campaign contributions and free speech. Enfranchising felons. Subsidizing with federal money the voter registration of Democrat Party constituencies, such as college students, and preventing states from using traditional methods of ensuring election integrity and voter privacy. Many have argued that H.R. 1 is entirely unconstitutional because it federalizes the election administration. But the truth is much more complicated. H.R. 1 contains some sections that are perfectly constitutional, even if not well advised. But they are intertwined with provisions that are clearly or arguably unconstitutional. This intertwining would take decades of litigation to unravel. H.R. 1 cites at least 3 constitutional clauses to support it. One is a guarantee clause, Article 4, Section 4, by which the United States guarantees each state a Republican form of government. But H.R. 1 has nothing to do with the guarantee clause. In the Constitution, the phrase Republican form means a government that follows the rule of law, is ultimately grounded in all or some portion of the citizenry and has no king. And Robert G. Nadelson has a link that's entitled A Republic, Not a Democracy, Initiative Reform in the Constitution's Guarantee Clause. That's linked to the where it says PDFs, if you want to take a look at it. Republics have never adopted any particular voting rules. Historically, in fact, limited and unequal suffrage has been the norm for politics. H.R. 1 also cites Section 5 of the 14th Amendment. This grants Congress authority to enforce certain legal standards, such as equal protection of the law, against state governments. But the Supreme Court tells us that Congress may not use Section 5 as an excuse to massively rewrite state law or change the federal-state balance. The court emphasizes that Section 5 is only remedial, not substantive. It adds that a law passed under Section 5 must be congruent and proportional to the problem it purports to address. H.R. 1 recites alleged disparities among groups in voting and says the bill is designed to address them, but such disparities, without other evidence, do not prove unconstitutional discrimination. Most importantly, H.R. 1 solutions go far beyond anything needed to remedy them. In other words, the bill is not congruent and proportional. Rather, it's a federal sledgehammer purportedly fashioned to kill a gnat, but really made to bash the rest of us. The third constitutional provision cited by H.R. 1 is the Elections Clause, or more accurately, the Times, Places, and Manner Clause in the Constitution. That is Article 1, Section 4, Clause 1. H.R. 1's reliance on the Elections Clause is somewhat better grounded than its reliance on the Guarantee Clause or the 14th Amendment. Now, the Election Clause reads as follows. The times, places, and manner of holding elections for senators and representatives shall be prescribed in each state by the legislature thereof, but the Congress may at any time by law make or alter such regulations, except as to the places of choosing senators. Essentially, the Elections Clause gives Congress power to override state laws on such mechanics as the time of election, polling places, registration rules, percentages required for victory, the nature of the ballot, and congressional districting. The Election Clause can at least partially support some of H.R. 1's rules. And an example is a mandate that states use mail-in ballots, a mandate that would be stupid but probably constitutional for congressional elections. But beyond that, there are many problems with using the elections clause to support H.R. 1. For one thing, that clause applies only to congressional elections. It grants no power over presidential elections. The Supreme Court has ruled repeatedly that state legislatures have almost complete control over presidential elections. Indeed, the court reaffirmed that classic case on the subject just last year. So H.R. 1's pretense of regulating presidential elections is just that, a pretense. Nor can the bill's mail-in ballot vote or rules apply to state elections. If the mail-in mandate is valid as to congressional elections, states still could use traditional ballots for all other electoral contests. Here's another election clause problem. If Congress wished to erect an independent commission to draw congressional districts, it probably could do so, but instead, H.R. 1 orders the states to erect such commissions. It violates a well-settled Supreme Court rule called the non-commandeering doctrine. That doctrine generally forbids the federal government from ordering states to adopt or not adopt measures. In particular, Congress cannot direct the states to change their own governmental structures, yet H.R. 1 purports to direct the states to do just that. H.R. 1 also seeks to impose campaign finance regulations. In recent years, the courts have assumed that campaign finance is within the manner of holding elections, but the issue has never been litigated squarely, and as the author of a widely cited research study of the Elections Clause, titled Congressional Election Power, also at i2i.org, which is Nadelson's site, I can report that, 1, it does not authorize campaign regulations, and 2, history instructs us to interpret it narrowly. So if the Senate passes H.R. 1, campaign finance lawsuits also will long endure. If H.R. 1 becomes law, we will have two choices. We can suffer years and perhaps decades of election confusion, litigation, and likely corruption, or we can adopt a constitutional amendment to straighten things out. Now, because Congress is unlikely to propose such an amendment unless it extends congressional reform even further, the only way to obtain one would be to call a convention of the states to propose it. For several reasons, holding a convention of the states would be a good idea, but confusing and corrupting our elections would be a very stiff price to pay. And this is Robert Nadelson. He is a former constitutional law professor, senior fellow in constitutional jurisprudence at the Independence Institute. He is the author of widely cited articles on the Elections Clause and the Guarantee Clause. The first was relied on by Chief Justice John Roberts in the 2010 case, and the second by Justice, then Judge Neil Gorsuch in the 2014 case. He's also the author of a wonderful book on Article 5 called The Law of Article 5, State Initiation of Constitutional Amendments. I highly recommend getting that book because it goes into detail, just what an Article 5 convention would be about. Also, go to conventionofstates.com and check out and read about Convention of States and how the convention method of Article 5 is used. I'll drop a link in the description below. In the comments below, let me know what you think about H.R. 1. Also, let me know if you think that a convention would be a convention of states would be a good way to stop this. And I'll see you in the next video. We're a year out from the 2022 midterm elections for Senate and House of Representatives, and things look to be shaping up rather interestingly. Got this article from the AP, and it says wave of retirement signals battles ahead for Republicans. This is not the way that the Republicans wanted to begin the year. Missouri's Roy Blunt on Monday became the 5th Republican senator to announce he will not seek re-election. a retirement wave that portends an ugly campaign season next year and gives Democrats fresh hope in preserving the razor-thin Senate majority. History suggests Republicans are well positioned to reclaim at least one chamber of Congress next year, but officials in both parties agree that the surge of GOP departures will make the Republicans' challenge more difficult in the Senate. Anytime you lose an incumbent, it's bad news, said Republican strategist Rick Tyler, who briefly worked for failed Missouri campaign or Senate candidate Todd Aiken nearly a decade ago. Missouri is not necessarily a safe place for Republicans. Democrats have won there. The 71-year-old Blunt's exit is a reminder of how the nation's politics have shifted since the rise of Donald Trump. Blunt and his retiring colleagues from Ohio, GOP colleagues from Ohio, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, and Alabama represent an old guard who fought for conservative policies but sometimes resisted the deeply personal attacks and unseen governance or uneven governance that dominated the Trump era. Their departures will leave a void likely to be filled by a new generation of Republicans who are more willing to embrace Trumpism, or by Democrats. Several Missouri Republicans are expected to seek the nomination to replace Blunt, but none will be more divisive than former Governor Eric Greitens, who resigned in 2018 amid the fallout of a sex scandal and ethics investigation. Missouri's Republican base has since rallied behind him, believing he was unfairly prosecuted. Greitens was considering running for the GOP nomination even before Blunt's announcement. He is expected to announce his candidacy as soon as Tuesday morning. Two leading Missouri Democrats, former Senator Clay McCaskill and 2016 Senate candidate Jason Kander, both said they would not run for the open seat. Ahead of Greitens' announcement, some Republicans worried he could jeopardize the Senate seat if he emerges as the party's nominee. Stephen Law, a key ally of Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell and CEO of the Senate Leadership Fund, warned that Republicans may be beginning to repeat the mistakes of 2010, when the GOP lost the Senate majority by embracing flawed far-right candidates. We have an opportunity to win back a majority, Law said, but in 2010, that opportunity was lost on the Senate side because of unelectable candidates who got nominated. Back in 2010, Tea Party favorite Christine O'Donnell beat a longtime GOP congressman in the Delaware Senate primary before losing in a landslide in the general election following reports of personal financial difficulties, questionable use of campaign funds, and allegations that she had dabbled into witchcraft. 2 years later in Indiana, Richard Murdoch defeated six-term Senator Richard Lugar in the 2012 campaign, but he imploded after a debate in which he said pregnancy resulting from a rape is something that God intended. In Missouri, Republican nominee Aiken lost after he insisted on a local talk show that women's bodies have ways to avoid pregnancy in cases of legitimate rape. And in the decades since Aiken's debacle, Missouri's politics, like the nation's, have evolved in a way that gives both parties opportunities. States like Missouri, Ohio, and Iowa, recently considered swing states, are trending away from Democrats. At the same time, previous red states like North Carolina and Georgia are trending away from Republicans. Missouri hasn't elected a Democrat senator since McCaskill beat Aiken in 2012. Trump carried the state last November by 15 percentage points. Trump carried Ohio, where Republican Senator Rob Portman will not seek re-election, by 8 percentage points. The former president won by the same margin in Iowa, where 87-year-old Republican Senator Chuck Grassley is considering retirement. Democrats are expected to be more competitive in North Carolina, where Trump eked out a victory by just 1 percentage point, and in Wisconsin, should Republican Senator Ron Johnson follow through with the campaign promise not to seek more than 2 terms. Democrats have not lost any incumbents to retirement, but they are defending vulnerable incumbents in Georgia and Arizona, among others. They have no margin for error. Republicans will claim the Senate majority for the last 2 years of President Joe Biden's term. If they pick up even one additional seat next November, the party that occupies the White House traditionally suffers significant losses in the first midterm election of a new president. President Barack Obama's Democrat Party, for example, lost 63 seats in the House and 6 in the Senate in 2010. Democrats are hopeful that Trump will become an unwilling ally in 2022. The former Republican president has vowed to play an active role in the midterms, particularly by supporting pro-Trump candidates in primary elections. That leaves little room for well-established Republicans like Blunt, who were popular statewide. The challenge for Republicans will be the race to the bottom in the Republican primary, said Morgan Jackson, a leading Democrat strategist based in North Carolina. It's not about what you say, it's about how loud and angry you say it. That's a very different view of the world. Jackson said it's a safe bet Republicans will win the House majority, but he is optimistic that Trump's meddling in Senate primaries will help limit Democrats' losses. Maybe it won't be a good cycle, but maybe it won't be a bad cycle, he said. J.B. Porsche, who leads the Democrat allies Senate Majority PAC, noted that Republicans are focused on the nation's culture wars, while Democrats are in the process of sending billions of dollars to working-class Americans affected by the pandemic. That contrast will help Democrats, he said. There is a working family economic argument that Democrats can still make in the middle of the country in places like Missouri and Ohio and keep them competitive, he said. Meanwhile, Blunt predicted political success for Republicans in Missouri and beyond during a Monday news conference. He also reflected upon the 2010 election, when Democrats were punished nationwide after embracing Obama's fiscal stimulus and healthcare overhaul. I think 2022 will be a great year in the country, and I think it will be a fine year in the Senate race, Blunt told reporters. The Republican Party will do just fine. Good article. One thing that I disagree with is the fact that, as J.B. Porsche says, Republicans are focused on the nation's culture wars, while Democrats are in the process of sending billions of dollars to working-class Americans affected by the pandemic. One thing that Andrew Breitbart had always said is, politics is downstream of culture. You know, first you have to win the culture war before you win the political war. That's what helped the Democrats and the Solinsky type socialists win the country's battles. But 2022 is definitely going to be rather interesting, and hopefully things will come out of it. And yeah, now speaking of the Senate, former President Trump is actually calling on someone to run for that seat in Georgia. This coming from the Epoch Times. Former President Donald Trump called on former NFL player Herschel Walker to run for Georgia's Senate race in 2022. Wouldn't it be fantastic if the legendary Herschel Walker ran for the United States Senate in Georgia, Trump said in a news release. He would be unstoppable, just like he was when he played for the Georgia Bulldogs and in the NFL. He is also a great person. Run, Herschel, run. Walker, who supported Trump during his 2016 campaign, voiced his support for the former president during the 2020 Republican National Convention last year. Walker is a native of Georgia who was a running back for the Georgia Bulldogs, winning the Heisman Trophy in 1982 before joining the Trump-backed United States Football League in the early 80s. After that, he played for the Dallas Cowboys, Minnesota Vikings, and several other NFL teams for 12 seasons. Walker, during his 2020 RNC speech, categorically denied leftist claims that Trump is a racist. It hurt my soul to hear the terrible names that people call Donald, he said. The worst one is racist. I take it as a personal insult because that people would think I've had a 37-year friendship with a racist. People that think that don't know what they're talking about. Growing up in the Deep South, I've seen racism up close. I know what it is, and it isn't Donald Trump. The 2022 Georgia Senate race will pit a GOP challenger against Democrat Senator Raphael Warnock of Georgia, who nearly defeated former Republican Senator Kelly Loeffler of Georgia. Loeffler was appointed for the Senate seat by Governor Brian Kemp after the resignation of Senator Johnny Isakson at the end of 2019. Loeffler has publicly expressed interest in running for the seat in 2022, as has former Republican Representative Doug Collins. Former Republican Senator David Perdue several weeks ago filed paperwork to run for the seat, but later withdrew his bid. And in recent days, Trump has handed out endorsements to Republican Senator Mike Crapo of Idaho, South Carolina Governor Henry McMaster, and the Arkansas Attorney General bid by the state's Republican Lieutenant Governor Tim Griffin. Trump also endorsed former White House Press Secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders for Arkansas Governor, as well as the campaign of Republican Senators Tim Scott of South Carolina, John Kennedy of Louisiana, John Boozman of Arkansas, and Jerry Moran of Kansas. Separately, the former president, in public speeches and email statements, has threatened to back primary challenges against Republican incumbents, including Senator Lisa Murkowski of Alaska, who voted to convict Trump during his second impeachment trial in February. Now, there have been a couple of NFL players who had served in Congress. One right off the top of my head, I think, is Steve Largent of, I want to say, Oklahoma, who ran for and served in the U.S. House. Also, you had former Senator Jim Bunting. I believe he was in Kentucky, who ran for, or who was in the Senate, as well as a few others. So sports and politics, definitely a good pairing. And not only that, but there's this from the Washington Examiner, and it says, Matthew McConaughey says possible bid for Texas governor as a true consideration. Oscar-winning actor Matthew McConaughey hinted that he may run for governor of Texas, potentially adding politician to his list of careers. In a podcast on Wednesday, the Texas-born actor called the possibility a true consideration. I'm not asking a question. Renee Mancarius, host of the podcast The Balanced Voice, said, "Don't comment, but should your next leadership role ever include you running for governor of this wonderful state? We'd be very happy here, but don't answer that. I'm not asking that." Right, I hear you. It's a true consideration, McConaughey said. The 51-year-old, who currently lives in Austin and is father of 3, appeared on the podcast to discuss his book Green Lights, which aims to give advice to readers based on his life experience. When asked by conservative radio host Hugh Hewitt in November if he would ever run for anything, McConaughey said, "I don't know. I mean, that wouldn't be up to me. It would be up to the people more than it would me. I would say this, look, politics seems to be a broken business to me right now. And when politics redefines this purpose, I'd be a hell of a lot more interested. No matter what side of the aisle you're on, or as I said earlier, denomination. We have broken these social contracts," the actor said. "We don't trust each other, and that leads us not to trust in ourselves, which if that becomes epidemic, then we've got anarchy." Over the years, McConaughey has been unclear about his political leanings and specific policy ideas, taking a more middle ground approach. If a potential gubernatorial bid would not be the actor's first foray outside the world of acting. In 2019, McConaughey joined the faculty at University of Texas at Austin's Moody College of Communications as a professor of practice in the Department of Radio, Television, and Film. Now, like as the article said, McConaughey has been unclear about his political leanings, taking a more middle ground approach, but it'll be interesting to see just where McConaughey lands, and I think he would be the first actor since Arnold Schwarzenegger to become governor of a state. And of course, it's not just actors and baseball players, but also news contributors and even former talk show hosts. Like there was Jerry Springer, who I believe ran for Congress and was at one point mayor of Cincinnati, Ohio. Well, we got this from BizPac Review. And it says, Geraldo Rivera announces his possible serious Senate run. Which party will have him? If all goes as planned, longtime, very argumentative Fox News contributor Geraldo Rivera, a beloved figure known for his contrarian positions, may soon be Senator Geraldo Rivera. In a tweet posted Wednesday afternoon, he announced that he's pondering running for current Ohio Senator Rob Portman's seat in 2022. A couple of days after Inauguration Day in January, Portman, a 10-year Senate veteran, revealed he won't be seeking re-election in 2022 because of partisan gridlock. Could Rivera, a guy who is capable of fiercely defending his positions, with shouting and everything while still remaining friends with, and even married to his opponents, be the guy to fix the gridlock? Mayhap. Is he serious though, or is he just playing around? Speaking with the Plain Dealer, the newspaper for his hometown of Cincinnati, he's only been there since 2017, but he's vowed to stay there forever. The longtime Fox News contributor claimed he certainly is serious. Rivera has said he was serious about the endeavor and planned on traveling the state on a listening tour in coming weeks. To solicit feedback about his potential candidacy, he said he and his wife, Erica Levy, a Democrat, would talk it over in the coming weeks as they decide, the paper reported Wednesday evening. I think it's a crucial seat. We're very concerned about the future of Ohio and the nation, and we think we have a role to play, he said to the paper. Sure, he's paid that maybe I might run game before her. Case in point, that run in New Jersey never materialized. Irregardless, he said in his remarks to the Plain Dealer that he'd self-fund some of the Ohio campaign to get it off the ground, and that he views himself in the mold of Ohio Representative Anthony Gonzalez. It's a telling remark to make because Gonzalez voted 2 months ago to impeach former President Donald Trump, a man who's supposed to be Rivera's friend. For this move, the Ohio representative is now facing a Trump-backed primary challenge. BizTech Review tweeted on February 28th, Trump backs primary challenger of GOP lawmaker who voted to impeach him. As it comes, all this comes as Rivera continues to blame the former president for the January 6th raid at the U.S. Capitol, a move that's earned him ire from the GOP base. Back in January, he too supported Trump's impeachment, tweeting out on January 13th, Donald Trump should be impeached. He should know history is judging him whether or not he is convicted and removed from office. He should also apologize to the families of those who lost their lives. His actions were inexcusable and undeniable. This time he did it. And then the day before the former president's speech at CPAC 2021, Rivera posted a video tweet demanding Trump apologize for the riot. There are 2 tweets, one on February 27th, which says, welcome back, Mr. President, but first apologize for January 6th. And March 11th, this is how I feel about President Trump, my friend. There's a video there, yet he still calls Trump a friend. He's been a friend of mine forever. I've been very public in my disapproval of his actions post-election, and certainly condemn in the most vigorous way what happened on January 6th, Rivera said to the Plain Dealer about the former president. However, I think President Trump is not only irredeemable, but he's a force of nature who has been a lifelong friend in my adult life. I would expect he would approve of this. We can resolve our issues and help heal the Republican Party. Mayhap, but all of this backstabbing is not endeared the Fox News personality to the GOP base. And so predictably, his announcement of a possible Senate runner was not well received. Here's just a sliver of the backlash. Jack Posobiec on March 11th tweeted out, hi, Geraldo Rivera, will you be using this funny selfie in your Senate campaign? Ouch. Patty tweeted out on March 11th, 2021, Geraldo Rivera, please do not run for U.S. Senate as a Republican. We do not need you, and we do not need another rhino. You are such a backstabber. I live in your area, and you have a no vote for me and my husband. Free-thinking woman tweeted out on March 10th, not if you're a turncoat. Marie tweeted out, hello, no, you are a douche, and you are a traitor to the MAGA movement. You threw President Trump under the bus. G tweeted out on March 11th, sit down, traitor. Dia Martino in the Thailand house tweeted out, President Trump had more political savvy in one hand than you have in your whole body. Stop thinking you can be even remotely be a leader. Stick to finding empty vaults, just like the empty suit you are. Best 1776 tweeted out on March 11th. As a Trump supporter, I will never vote for you, and that's nothing against your career as a journalist. You're just not the American First politician red ring voters are looking for. If Rivera proceeds with the run anyway, he'll likely face a slate of high-profile challengers, including potentially J.D. Vance, the author of Hillbilly Elegy. Rod Dreher tweeted out on January 25th, I hope at J.D. Vance will run for Ohio Senator Rob Woodman's seat in 2022. He is exactly the kind of new Republican we need. Now, I think that might be a little iffy, but a little interesting. I mean, I'm not a huge fan of Geraldo Rivera yet. I'm not one to throw him under the bus, but yeah, Geraldo Rivera could be interesting. You know, we already saw Herschel Walker, so that could be interesting. Matthew McConaughey could be interesting. So, regardless, the 2022 election is already shaping up to be a real barn burner, and we're already a year and a half, or a year and 8 months away. Leave a comment below for what you think about Geraldo Rivera, Matthew McConaughey, and Herschel Walker. They're possibly thinking about running for political seats. And I'll see you in the next video. This coming Sunday morning at 2 a.m., we set our clocks ahead an hour for daylight saving time. Now, there's been a lot of debate in Congress about it. As a matter of fact, there are 8 senators that have a bill to extend daylight savings time to year-round. Got this from my good friends over at thedailysignal.com. And Stephen Hall, 8 senators' bill to extend daylight saving time to year-round. A bipartisan group of senators has reintroduced the Sunshine Protection Act, which would extend daylight saving time to year-round rather than keep it at 8 months. One of those lawmakers, Senator Marco Rubio, said the change would give our nation's families more stability throughout the year. The Florida Republican and 7 colleagues from both sides of the aisle are co-sponsors of the measure, which would eliminate the need to reset clocks an hour ahead near the end of winter, or back an hour in the fall. Oops. Daylight saving time currently begins at 2 a.m. on the second Sunday in March, which is March 14 this year, and ends at 2 a.m. on the first Sunday in November. Senate leadership sent the Sunshine Protection Act, S263, which the lawmakers reintroduced Tuesday, to the Commerce, Science, and Transportation Committee. Rubio's co-sponsors are Republican Senators James Lankford of Oklahoma, Ward Blunt of Missouri, Cindy Hyde-Smith of Mississippi, and Rick Scott of Florida, as well as Democrat Senators Sheldon Whitehouse from Rhode Island, Ron Wyden of Oregon, and Ed Markey of Massachusetts. The bill previously was introduced in the House on March 6, 2019, but didn't receive a vote. The Sunshine Protection Act follows the lead of the Florida legislature's 2018 enactment of year-round daylight saving time. A change in federal law is required for the Florida measure to take effect. 15 other states have passed similar laws, resolutions, or voter initiatives on the subject. Alabama, Arkansas, California, Delaware, Georgia, Idaho, Louisiana, Maine, Ohio, Oregon, South Carolina, Tennessee, Utah, Washington, and Wyoming. Studies have shown many benefits of a year-round daylight saving time, which is why the Florida legislature voted to make it permanent in 2018. I'm proud to reintroduce this bipartisan bill to make daylight saving time permanent and give our nation's families more stability throughout the year, Rubio said. I don't want to parent of a young child that would oppose getting rid of springing forward or falling back. Congress created daylight saving time years or decades ago as a wartime effort. Now it's well past time to lock the clock and end this experiment, Lankford said. Making daylight saving time permanent would end the biannual disruptions to daily life and give families more daylight hours to enjoy after work and school, Whitehouse said. Studies have found that daylight saving time can reduce car crashes involving pedestrians because drivers have better visibility when daylight hours are aligned with commuters' standard work hours, according to the American Journal of Public Health and the Journal of Safety Research, which Rubio cited. The study also found an 8 to 11% reduction in automotive collisions with wildlife due to some animals' nocturnal behavior. However, a study by the University of Colorado at Boulder, published in Science Daily in January 2020, looked at 732,000 accidents over 2 decades and found the annual switch to daylight saving time was associated with a 6% increase in fatal car crashes the week following the switch. An increase in physical activity among youngsters also results as a result of longer daylight hours, according to studies cited by the senators that were published by the International Journal of Behavioral Nutrition and Physical Activity and the Journal of Physical Activity and Health. Now, I don't mind that bill, especially considering as how we have too many people, going with the whole daylight saving time and this, that, and everything else. But, I mean, this is one bill that if Congress doesn't pass it and it is on the ballot in a few states, I would recommend looking into it and possibly even voting yes on it. But there's this article on it from radio.com over at msn.com. It says daylight saving time is Sunday and it could become permanent. Get ready to adjust your clocks once again this Sunday for daylight saving time. However, this could be the last time we're springing forward if the Senate gets its way. There is a bipartisan bill currently in the Senate that, if passed, would end time change once and for all. Senator Marco Rubio of Florida reintroduced the Sunshine Protection Act of 2021 to the Senate, along with James Lankford, Republican Oklahoma, Wade Blunt, Republican Missouri, Sheldon Whitehouse, Democrat Rhode Island, Ron Wyden, Democrat Oregon, Cindy Hyde-Smith, Republican Mississippi, Rick Scott, Republican Florida, and Ed Markey, Democrat Massachusetts this week. The bill calls for not falling back in November and enjoying DST year-round. The senators cited multiple benefits to daylight savings permanent, would lead to fewer accidents and robberies, require less energy usage, and affects mental health. Additionally, a study in German neurology said that people are at higher risk for heart attack and stroke due to sleep deprivation. The Senate would need to vote before November to pass the bill. According to CNN, the bill was passed in Rubio's home state of Florida in 2018, but it would need to be passed at the federal level to go into effect. 15 other states passed similar legislation, while several states and countries have already zipped daylight saving time, including Puerto Rico, Hawaii, Arizona, and Guam. Some doctors are even backing the idea of making DST permanent. Given the relationship of stress to the immune system, I think that it would be wise to choose between DST, daylight saving time, and standard time, and stick to it, said Dr. Beth A. Melo, a professor of neurology at Vanderbilt University Medical Center at Nashville, Tennessee. So, she's currently right there. I mean, just stick with one or the other and just, choose one or the other and just stick with it because, many people are stressed enough as it is. They don't need this on their system. They don't need this to stress them out even more. And there's this article from Deseret News. It's entitled, Is Clock Ticking on Time Changes? Congress could trigger Utah off for year-round daylight saving time. Standard time could see its sunset in Utah and other western states as a pair of bipartisan bills in Congress seek to let states make daylight saving time permanent, giving residents more evening sunlight year-round. Nobody wants to reset their clocks twice a year. This is an unpopular, outdated practice that does nothing but confuse our schedules. It's time the federal government let the states decide, Representative Chris Stewart, Republican Utah, said Wednesday in a statement provided to the Deseret News. Stewart is sponsoring the Daylight Act, which would allow states to stay on daylight saving time permanently if they choose. Meanwhile, the Sunshine Protection Act, sponsored for the third year in a row by Senator Marco Rubio, a Florida Republican, along with several other Democrat and Republican senators, would make daylight saving time permanent in most states, which currently have standing time for 4 months after the clock falls back in November, and daylight saving time for 8 months after spring forward in March. Numerous studies have linked changing the clocks twice a year to issues like heart problems, depression, negative effects on sleep, and car crashes. An Australian study even found a link to an increase in the suicide rate. Other studies point to something called microsleeps, also referred to as zoning out. Daylight saving time will begin Sunday at 2 a.m., a change that will add an extra hour of evening daylight to the longest days of the year. Clocks will then return to standard time November 7. Rubio has sponsored his legislation since Florida passed the same law in 2018, and Utah, which passed a law last year to not change times, needs federal action to implement it. The call to end the antiquated practice of clock changing is gaining momentum throughout the nation, Rubio said in a statement. Studies have shown many benefits of a year-round daylight saving time, which is why the Florida legislature voted to make it permanent in 2018. I am proud to reintroduce this bipartisan bill to make daylight saving time permanent and give our families more stability throughout the year, he said. 15 states recently passed similar laws. In 2020, the Utah legislature passed SB 59, sponsored by Republican Senator Wayne Harper of Taylorsville, that would make daylight saving time permanent should Congress and at least 4 of the western states do so as well. Although states can ditch the switch to stay on standard time throughout the year, as Arizona and Hawaii have done, they can move to a permanent daylight saving time schedule without action by Congress. The system, originally set up to save fuel during World War I and World War II, has been modified over the years by Washington politicians. Idaho, Wyoming, Oregon, California, and Washington have all passed bills to remain on daylight saving time, and New Mexico is considering the change, meaning the Beehive state just awaits approval from the federal government before putting its bill into action. Harper said he's met with legislators from other western states, and most are eager to make the change except for those in Arizona, where they wish to remain on standard time. The state senator said he believes Congress will likely move to end the issue this year, and that one of the 2 bills will have a really good likelihood of passing. This is an issue that's been debated for decades. There's a long, long history of this, of countries wanting to have more light in the evening, not just the United States, but other countries, Harper said. He recalled listening to arguments about time changes as a child, since he was first elected to the state legislature in the late 1990s. It's been one of the hottest topics, most continually discussed topic. People want to stop switching clocks, and the vast majority of people want more light in the evening with the daylight saving time year-round, Harper said. Representative Marsha Jenkins, Republican of Provo, has advocated for an end to changing the clock since she sponsored a resolution passed on the final day of the 2019 session, supporting a bill in Congress introduced in July 2018 by U.S. Representative Republican Rob Bishop of Utah, calling for states to have the power to decide whether to continue the spring forward and fallback routine. But even as states have worked to stop changing the clock, congressional movement on the issue has ticked slowly. Something that's been difficult for me to understand is the non-movement or apparent disinterest on this issue from our congressional delegation, and actually Congress in general, not because I think it's the most important issue out there, but it's an issue that's important to so many Americans, Judkins said Wednesday. When the state legislature considers any bill addressing daylight saving time, Judkins noted that it gets more attention than most. She still gets emails about past bills. So I hope that Congress will take a really good hard look at it this time, Judkins said. The data is there that Americans are tired of switching the clocks. But not just that, it's better for our health, it's better for business, it's better for a lot of reasons, according to the representative. While raising her 7 kids, Judkins recalled that some of them had issues that made changing their schedules along with the time change difficult. When she saw a potential switch to standard time only as a possible solution to give school kids more sunlight in the morning, she now simply wants the clock to stop changing. Some people with disabilities, as well as those who take certain medications, can face difficulties when the time changes. Should daylight saving time become permanent, Judkins hopes the state will consider giving school districts more flexibility and how they structure their hours of attendance so that high schoolers and elementary students don't have to get up quite so early, as studies have proven they need more sleep. I feel like we can make it work. We've made it work in the past. We can make it work whichever way it goes, but the health benefits are so much better, Judkins said. But Judkins acknowledged that the issue can be contentious. Some people like the way Utah falls back and swings forward. Some would prefer remaining on standard time, and some would like to keep the sun out as long into the evening as possible. If leaders chose, federal law does allow the state to stay on standard time, but Judkins noted most don't seem to favor that idea. And so if our only choices are to stay in daylight saving time year round, or quit changing the clock, I have felt, and this is not a scientific study, but as I looked at my emails, more people who wrote, just stop changing the clock. That's what I want, Judkins said. And she's right. Many people do want to stop the clock. Like I said, or as the article said, Arizona and Hawaii do that. I thought Indiana does that, and maybe might only be in certain states. Leave a comment below on that, and feel free to check me if I'm wrong on that. But yeah, and there's this article from CNN on the same subject. Senators once again introduce a bill to make daylight saving time permanent. A group of bipartisan senators is reintroducing a bill that would make daylight saving time or DST permanent. In the United States, most states observe DST, which starts on the second Sunday in March at 2 a.m. and ends on the first Sunday in November at 2 a.m. for 8 months out of the year and 4 months of standard time. But the Sunshine Protection Act proposed by Republican Senator Marco Rubio calls for not falling back in November and instead enjoying DST year-round. It would not change the country's current time zones or the number of hours of sunlight. The bill was already passed in Rubio's home state of Florida in 2018, but in order to go into effect, it requires a change at the federal level. 15 other states, including California, which voted to make daylight saving time permanent in 2018, and Washington, which did the same in 2019, have passed similar legislation. The call to end the antiquated practice of clock changing is gaining momentum throughout the nation, Rubio said in a statement on Tuesday. Not everyone observes the tradition in the U.S. Hawaii and Arizona don't, the 5 major U.S. territories, American Samoa, Guam, the Northern Mariana Island, Puerto Rico, and the U.S. Virgin Islands also do not observe DST. In a recent statement, Rubio cited multiple benefits to extending DST, including reducing the number of car accidents Americans experience and helping reduce the risk of seasonal depression. He said such legislation would give families more stability throughout the year. Democrat Senator Ed Markey of Massachusetts echoed Rubio in highlighting the benefits of extending DST. Studies have found year-round daylight saving time would improve public health, public safety, and mental health, especially important during this cold and dark COVID winter, Markey said in a statement, adding that he is proud to sponsor the Sunshine Protection Act to add an extra hour of sunshine for the full 365 days a year. Now, like the article said, it is a bipartisan effort, and it is good to see some of those on the left supporting this, like Wyden of Oregon, Markey of Massachusetts, for a couple of them. But yeah, so leave a comment below what you think about daylight saving time. Should it be year-round? Should it not be? Do you like changing the clocks forward and back? And I'll see you in the next video. And that's going to do it for the news for this week. I am Bulow. Again, if you like what you watch, please go ahead and hit the thumbs up button. Also subscribe and tell your friends, tell your neighbors, tell an enemy or two even. And I will be back next week. Until next time, peace.